She lost her hair first. Then she lost the feeling in her legs. Then she lost the ability to walk across the room without collapsing. The doctors ran test after test and came back with nothing. Her family whispered to each other when they thought she couldn't hear. Her friends stopped calling. And her husband, the man who had stood beside her at the altar just 3 years before, the man who had kissed her on her wedding day and promised to love and protect her for the rest of his life, that man sat beside her hospital bed every single day, holding her hand, looking at her with what she thought was love, preparing her meals with what she thought was care. He was the one who told the doctors she had always been fragile. He was the one who gently suggested, more than once, that maybe the stress was getting to her. Maybe, he said softly, she was doing this to herself. And the doctors listened to him. Because he seemed so devoted. Because he seemed so broken up about it. Because nobody, not a single person in that hospital, not one of her friends, not even her own family at first, could imagine that the man sitting beside her was not trying to save her. He was trying to finish what he had already started. What you are about to hear is not a horror movie. It is not fiction. It is the true story of a woman named Brianna, who nearly died in a hospital bed while the person responsible for putting her there brought her breakfast every morning and watched her get worse. Before we go any further, let us be honest with you about something. This story is going to make you angry. It is going to make you question how well any of us really know the people sleeping next to us. It is going to make you wonder how many women right now, in hospitals all over this country, are being told they are anxious or dramatic or simply unwell, when in reality, someone in their own home is making them sick on purpose. Because here is what we know. Brianna did not have a mysterious illness. She did not have a rare autoimmune disorder. She did not have cancer. She had a husband who had been secretly, deliberately, and methodically poisoning her food and drinks with one of the most dangerous substances on Earth, a heavy metal so toxic that the United States government classifies it as a potential weapon of mass destruction. The question is not just what he did. The question is why. Why would a man who met his wife at their high school prom, who had been with her for nearly a decade, who had a young child with her, why would a man like that decide that the only way out of his marriage was to slowly kill the woman he claimed to love? And the second question, the one that is going to haunt you long after this video ends, is this: how many people looked at Brianna and saw a sick woman when they should have seen a victim? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened to Brianna, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to a high school gymnasium on a warm spring evening, when two 18-year-olds met at prom and something clicked between them that neither of them could fully explain. Brianna was the kind of girl people remembered, not because she was loud or flashy. She was the opposite of that. She was remembered because of the way she made people feel. Teachers described her as one of the most thoughtful students they had ever had. Friends described her as someone who showed up. If you needed her, she was there. No questions asked, no conditions attached. She had grown up in a deeply faithful family in a small, tight-knit community in Southern California. And that faith, that quiet, unwavering sense of who she was and what she stood for, had followed her into adulthood. She went on to become a special needs teacher. She worked with children who struggled in ways that most people would never fully understand, and she did it not because it was a good job with good hours, but because she genuinely loved those kids. She loved watching them find their footing. She loved being the person who believed in them when the world had not quite figured out how to yet. People who worked with her said she had a gift for it, an instinctive patience and warmth that could not be taught. She was, by every account, someone who had chosen a life of service and meant it. And then there was Derek. Derek was sharp. He was ambitious in that quiet, steady way that tends to impress people. He had chosen to serve his country, joining the Navy after high school, and carrying himself with the kind of discipline and structure that military life tends to produce. He and Brianna had stayed together through the distance, through the deployments, through all of the sacrifices that come with loving someone who belongs to the service. She had waited for him. She had built her life around the idea of them. And when he finally came home for good and they got married, it felt, to everyone who knew them, like the right ending to a love story that had been years in the making. They settled in a quiet, rural stretch of East County, California, far enough from the city that the neighbors were sparse and the pace of life was slow. It was the kind of place where you could breathe, where your children could play outside, where you could believe, for a little while at least, that the world was small and safe and manageable. They had a son together, a little boy who was barely 2 years old when everything fell apart. By all appearances, they were happy. By all appearances, they were building exactly the life they had always talked about. But appearances, as Brianna would come to understand in the most devastating way imaginable, can be constructed just as carefully as they can be lived. What nobody knew, what Brianna herself did not know, was that Derek had been living a separate life. He had been having an affair, and at some point, in the quiet hours that he spent alone, he had made a calculation. He had decided that an affair was not a reason to have a difficult conversation. It was not a reason to ask for a divorce. It was not even a reason to feel guilty. It was, in his mind, a problem. And the problem had a solution. The solution, he decided, was Brianna. Not leaving her. Not being honest with her. Not ending the marriage with the kind of basic human decency that even the worst breakups tend to involve. The solution, Derek decided, was to eliminate her entirely. What happened next is something that still stops people cold when they hear it for the first time. In the late summer of 2017, Brianna started to feel off. That is the only way she could describe it at first. Just off. She was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. She felt a faint numbness in her hands and feet that she kept dismissing as stress or poor circulation. She was a busy woman. She was teaching full-time, raising a toddler, managing a household. Feeling tired made sense. Feeling run down made sense. She told herself it would pass. It did not pass. By September of 2017, the symptoms had begun to sharpen in ways that could no longer be easily explained away. The numbness in her limbs was deepening. She was losing weight without trying. She would wake up in the morning feeling like she had not slept at all, and by the afternoon, just standing in her classroom for a full lesson felt like climbing a mountain. There were mornings when she looked in the mirror and noticed something that frightened her, something she could not quite put into words yet, but that registered somewhere deep and instinctive as wrong. Her body was sending her signals that her mind was not yet ready to receive. Derek noticed too, of course. Or rather, Derek watched. He watched with the careful attention of someone who was monitoring a process he had set in motion. He began insisting on preparing her meals. He framed it as love. He framed it as concern. He was worried about her, he told her. She needed to take better care of herself. He was going to make sure she ate well. And Brianna, who by this point was exhausted and grateful and still so fundamentally trusting of the man she had loved for nearly a decade, let him. She let him cook for her. She let him bring her breakfast in the morning. She let him hand her drinks and snacks and all of the small, ordinary gestures of care that a devoted husband might offer a sick wife. She had no reason to believe those gestures were anything other than what they appeared to be. But behind each of those gestures was something she could not see, something that had no color, no taste, no odor. Thallium, a heavy metal so extraordinarily toxic that it was banned as a pesticide in the United States decades ago. A substance so dangerous that federal agencies classify it as a potential weapon of mass destruction. It is the kind of poison that does not announce itself. It works slowly, methodically, creeping through the body's nervous system like a shadow that keeps growing until the light is gone completely. Derek had not stumbled across thallium by accident. He had researched it. Investigators would later discover that he had searched for it deliberately on his phone, that he had read about it, that he had purchased it online not once, but 3 times. And on his phone, they found something else, a digital copy of a book called The Poisoner's Handbook, which described thallium as one of the worst poisons in existence, specifically because it kills slowly and gives the poisoner complete, calculated control over how fast their victim dies. Read that again. He chose a poison that gave him control over how fast she died. This was not a moment of rage. This was not a crime of passion. This was a plan, and he worked it with the kind of patience that is, frankly, almost impossible to comprehend. By December of 2017, he poisoned her a 2nd time. By January of 2018, a 3rd. Each time, he brought her breakfast. Each time, he sat beside her and held her hand while she suffered. Each time, he gently reminded the doctors who were trying to figure out what was wrong with her that she had always been a little fragile, that she had always struggled with stress. He even suggested at one point, according to those close to the case, that maybe her poor cooking habits were the reason she felt so unwell. Meanwhile, Brianna's body was being systematically destroyed. By early 2018,
To
she
everyone
could barely
who knew
move her
them,
limbs.
They
She had
seemed
lost
like
all
the
of her
perfect
hair.
couple.
She could not see clearly. She was drifting in and out of coherence, sometimes hallucinating, sometimes so disoriented that she could not track a simple conversation. Her sister, who had been watching this unfold with growing horror and increasing desperation, was frantic. The doctors were stumped. Nobody had seen a case of thallium poisoning at this level in years, possibly decades. It did not appear in the standard panels. It did not look like anything they were trained to spot. And so Brianna kept getting worse, and the man responsible for making her
everyone
worse
who knew
kept
them,
showing up at the hospital.
They seemed like the
kept speaking
perfect couple.
softly to the medical staff, kept being treated as a grieving, devoted husband who was doing everything he could to support his dying wife. And then, in March of 2018, something changed. Brianna was admitted to Kaiser Permanente Hospital in a state of crisis. She had deteriorated so severely that the doctors who received her were not optimistic. One investigator who was called in later recalled that when they reviewed her x-rays, her insides were, in his words, lit up from the lead reacting to the imaging, a visual that stopped everyone in the room cold. The medical staff began running every test they could think of, and finally, buried in the results, they found it. An extreme, unmistakable level of thallium in Brianna's bloodstream. Not a trace amount, not an accidental exposure. An extreme level. The kind of level that only gets there one way, repeated, deliberate ingestion over an extended period of time. The hospital immediately contacted law enforcement. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department was notified. And because of the nature of the substance involved, because thallium is so tightly controlled, so dangerous, so impossible to stumble across by accident, the FBI and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service were called in as well. Almost immediately, investigators began to look at the people closest to Brianna. And almost immediately, one name kept surfacing. Derek, her husband, the man who had been preparing her food, the man who had been at her side through every hospital visit, the man who, when investigators asked him to come in and speak with them, suddenly stopped cooperating. Just like that. No more helpful husband. No more concerned partner. The moment investigators wanted to talk to him directly, Derek went silent. That silence told investigators something important. But silence alone is not evidence. They needed more. They went through his phone with extraordinary thoroughness. And what they found there was not the browsing history of a concerned husband trying to understand his wife's mysterious illness. What they found was a research trail, searches for thallium, purchase records, and the digital copy of the Poisoner's Handbook, with its detailed descriptions of how thallium works, how it spreads through the body, how long it takes, and how the poisoner can modulate the dosage to control the pace of death. Derek had not been searching for a cure. He had been searching for precision. Meanwhile, the doctors were working frantically to save Brianna's life. The treatment for thallium poisoning is a substance called Prussian blue, a compound that binds to the thallium in the body and allows it to be excreted safely. It sounds simple. It is anything but. Brianna required Prussian blue and dialysis simultaneously, a grueling process that pushed her body to its absolute limits. There were days when the medical staff was not sure she would make it. There were days when they told her family to prepare. Her sister was at her side constantly, and there was something that her sister and her mother carried through all of those days, a desperate, burning need to understand what had happened, because nothing about Brianna's life had made this make sense. Brianna had not been reckless. She had not been exposed to industrial chemicals. She had not done anything that could explain the level of thallium in her system. She had simply been living her life in her own home with her husband, eating the meals he prepared for her, drinking the coffee he brought to her in the morning, trusting the person she had chosen. And every time her family asked Derek what he thought might have happened, every time they looked at him for answers, he had an answer ready. He was smooth that way. He was practiced. He had been living this double life, the devoted husband on one side, the calculating poisoner on the other, for months, and he had gotten very good at it. But the evidence was overwhelming. And when investigators confronted him with it, the carefully constructed version of Derek that the world had been allowed to see began to crack. He had purchased thallium on the internet 3 times. The receipts existed. The searches on his phone existed. The book on his phone existed. The timeline of his purchases lined up with painful precision against the timeline of Brianna's worsening symptoms. August of 2017, the first poisoning. December the 2nd. January of 2018, the 3rd. Each escalation matching a new purchase. Each purchase matching a new phase of Brianna's deterioration. The picture was not complicated. It was devastating in its clarity. And investigators found one more thing. A detail so cold, so calculated, that it stripped away any remaining doubt about whether this had been some kind of impulsive act. Derek had tried to stop Brianna from sharing her food with their 2-year-old son. One morning, when she went to give the toddler a portion of her breakfast, Derek had stopped her. He had said the boy might choke. She had thought it was an odd thing to say, but she had let it go. She had not yet understood what it meant. What it meant was that Derek knew exactly what was in that food and who it was meant for. His own child was sitting at the same table, and Derek had been careful to make sure the poison reached only one person. In December of 2018, Derek pleaded guilty. 3 counts of premeditated attempted murder. 1 for each time he had poisoned her. He sat in that courtroom in jail clothes and handcuffs, and he said nothing. He offered no explanation. His attorney told the court that a back injury Derek had sustained during his time in the Navy, one that required an electronic pain management implant, had clouded his judgment. The judge was not moved by that explanation. Nobody in that courtroom was moved by that explanation. But before the judge delivered his sentence, Brianna stood up. She had spent months in a hospital. She had lost her hair, her mobility, her sense of security, and very nearly her life. She had watched her son grow through some of those months from a hospital bed, wondering if she would be there to see him grow further. And now she stood in front of the man who had done all of that to her, and she spoke directly to him with a steadiness that stunned everyone in the room. She told him that she had wanted to believe she knew the man she had married, that she had wanted to believe he would never hurt her. She told the court that she had been terrified, genuinely, deeply terrified, at the thought that he could be the person responsible for trying to kill her. And then she looked at him and asked the questions that had no good answers. "How did you decide," she said, "that the only way out of a marriage was to kill your wife slowly while you watched her struggle for months? How could you, a father, do this to the mother of your son? Why were you the one to decide she was not a worthy mother? How," she asked, "does a person make that decision?" Derek sat in silence. He had nothing to say, and the judge, who had heard a great deal in his years on the bench, looked at Derek with barely controlled fury. The judge called what Derek had done selfish, cruel, cold, callous, vicious, inhumane. He noted that Derek had been having an affair, and that he had decided the most convenient solution to that affair was to remove his wife from the equation entirely. Not by telling the truth, not by asking for a divorce, but by feeding her rat poison in her breakfast until she stopped breathing. He asked Derek, directly, how he could have done something that also put his own son at risk. Derek said nothing. He had nothing. There was nothing to say. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms in prison, with no possibility of parole for a minimum of 21 years. The prosecutor, who had seen the evidence up close and understood every dimension of what Derek had done, said plainly and without hesitation, "This person should never be out of prison." But here is the part of this story that the sentencing cannot fully address. Here is the part that stays with you. Brianna survived. That is the miracle at the center of this story, and it would be wrong to pass over it without pausing. She survived. She fought her way through treatments that would have broken most people. She fought her way through the grief of realizing that the person she had loved and trusted since she was 18 years old had been trying to kill her. She fought her way through the physical aftermath of thallium poisoning, which, even after the substance is removed from the body, leaves damage behind. As of the last reports from her doctors, it is still not certain whether she will ever fully regain feeling in her legs. The poison did things to her nervous system that may never entirely reverse. And yet, Brianna chose not to disappear. She chose not to retreat into silence. She shared her story, specifically and deliberately, because she understood something important. She was not the only one. There are women right now who are experiencing symptoms that doctors cannot explain. There are women right now who are being told they are anxious or dramatic or imagining it. There are women right now whose partners are controlling the narrative of their illness, shaping the story that the doctors and family and friends are receiving, just as Derek had shaped it for months. And Brianna wanted those women to hear her say, "Keep pushing. Keep asking questions. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Do not let anyone, not a doctor, not a friend, not the person who sleeps beside you, talk you out of your own experience. Derek, now in his early 30s, is currently incarcerated at a California correctional institution. Under the terms of his plea agreement, he will be eligible for parole in October of 2033. The prosecutor who handled his case said he should never be out of prison. Brianna's family agreed. The question of whether he will one day walk free remains open, and it is a question that her family lives with every day. As for Brianna, she is raising her son. She is moving forward. She is doing what the people who know her best have always said she does. She shows up. She keeps going. She holds on to the things that matter and refuses to let the worst chapter of her life define the rest of it. She has found a way to take something that would have destroyed most people and turn it into a reason to speak, to warn, to stand up for women who do not yet have the strength to stand up for themselves. There is a question worth sitting with after everything you have just heard. Not a comfortable question, but an honest one. How many people looked at Brianna during those months and saw a woman who was falling apart, when they should have seen a woman who was being taken apart? How many of us, if we are honest with ourselves, might have done the same thing? Might have accepted the narrative that the charming, devoted, soft-spoken husband was offering, because that narrative was easier to hold than the alternative? How many of us are trained, in ways we do not even fully recognize, to believe the person who seems calm over the person who seems to be suffering? Because that is what Derek counted on. He counted on the assumption that a woman who is losing her hair and losing feeling in her limbs and barely able to get out of bed must simply be sick. He counted on the fact that nobody would look past the devoted husband bringing breakfast to ask the harder question. He was almost right. He was wrong, in the end, because Brianna's body held on long enough for the truth to surface. But he was very nearly right. And that is the part of this story that should keep all of us up at least a little bit at night. Was justice truly served here? A man who spent months methodically attempting to murder the mother of his child, who researched the perfect poison and purchased it 3 times and administered it with deliberate calculation, will be eligible to apply for parole before he turns 40. The woman he tried to kill may never fully recover the use of her legs. You tell us. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to know what you think. Would you have spotted the signs? And if someone you loved was getting sick and nobody could explain it, what would you do? If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you want to make sure the people you love are safe, share it. Because the best thing Brianna's story can do now is reach the people who need to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because the next story we are bringing you is just as real, just as chilling, and just as important. We will see you there.